In today's video, we look at Kobolds and Cobblestones, the game of fantasy gang rumbles from Osprey Wargames. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name is Lee. I'm your old hammered host. So recently we've been talking a lot about Mordheim, Games Workshop's influential fantasy street fighting game published way back in 1999. And those discussions reminded me that I actually have another, more recent urban fighting fantasy skirmish game sitting on the shelf. And I'm not referring to Frostgrave, I'm talking about Kobolds and Cobblestones, Fantasy Gang Rumbles, which is part of the Blue Book series from Osprey Wargames. This 64-page rule set is available in both digital and hard copy formats for about $15. I'll put a link to the digital version in the video description below in case you're interested. So I purchased a copy of Kobolds and Cobblestones when it was released back in 2018, and then set it on a shelf and kind of forgot about it until this week, which is a shame because it is actually a pretty cool set of rules for what I'll call Mordheim light skirmishes on the mean streets of a fantasy city. Kobolds and Cobblestones was written by Robert Berman, founder of Tabletop Gaming Magazine. It is a miniatures agnostic rule set, which means you can assemble your criminal gangs using whatever elf, dwarf, human, goblin, orc, zombie, skeleton, etc. miniatures you have in your collection. You also don't need any dice or rulers because Kobolds and Cobblestones uses playing cards to resolve combat and other events. And the game is designed to be played on a 2x2 area, meaning you can easily play it on a card table, your kitchen table, or even a 30x22 kill team type mat. Kobolds and Cobblestones is set in the fantasy city of Odensport, a neutral Casablanca type city where humans, elves, dwarves, goblins, orcs, kobolds, ratmen, and even trolls have learned to tolerate each other for the most part. The city is divided by a great river, with the more respectable factions living mostly on the southern side, known as the Red Streets, while the more disreputable creatures tend to congregate in the north side of town, known as Darkport. Darkport's criminal underworld was formerly dominated by a legendary dwarf crime boss who, upon his death, left behind not only a gigantic power vacuum in the underworld, but also caches of ill-gotten loot stashed in secret locations throughout the north side. As the established criminal hierarchy crumbles, Darkport's lesser gangs are currently engaging in a violent free-for-all, fighting amongst themselves for territory, gold, and prestige, with each gang leader vying to become the ultimate kingpin this side of the river. So my first impressions are that Kobolds and Cobblestones seems like a breezy, Mordheim-type skirmish with faster gameplay, a shorter learning curve, and some crafty mechanics to stir the drink. I'm certainly not a K&C expert, but let me try to show you some of the basics as I understand them. Let's start with building your gang. The first thing you do is select a leader from one of the 7 pre-generated crime lords listed in the book. These are Barry the Elf, the Kobold Egg Keeper, Doric the Lone Shark, Groblar the Goblin Queen, the Body Snatcher, Skreek Sewer Master, and Klaka the Orc Warboss. You don't have to pay any gold to recruit a leader, and each leader has its own stat line and special abilities. Here is the Body Snatcher, for example, who is kind of a necromancer-like human character. Stats include Alliance, which we'll talk about later, and then there's Cost, Move, Fight, Defend, Wounds, and critical hit effects, which we'll also get to here in a bit. The Body Snatcher also has a leadership of 1, which will give his gangers an extra combat card as long as he's on the board. He also has the special powers Extra Life and Dead Good, which involve reanimating enemy runts as zombies and absorbing energy from nearby friendly undead to give the Body Snatcher some combat buffs and an extra action, which could be handy. After you've chosen a leader, you then build your gang from a selection of runts, thugs, big guys, experts, and even wizards. In a casual game, both players can hire whoever they want to based on how much gold they've agreed to start with. But in a campaign, gangs will need to attain a certain amount of notoriety before hiring more expensive fighters like the big guys, experts, and wizards. Players are encouraged to build their gangs using a mix of different species. So for example, Klaka the Orc Warboss could lead a band of orcs, humans, ratmen, dwarves, skeletons, etc., and this variety would give his gang access to a wider range of abilities. However, there are a few challenges involved with this strategy. Orcs, ratmen, skeletons, and the like have black suit alignment, while humans, dwarves, elves, etc. have red suit alignment, because old resentments still run deep even in Odinsport. Gang members of one alignment are naturally antagonistic toward fellow gang members of the opposite alignment, and so may be hesitant to activate if they find themselves in close proximity during a battle, and I'll explain how that works here in a minute. So let's say for a very small game, Klaka the Orc War Boss has 10 gold to spend in preparation for a gang fight. He might hire a Goblin Runt and a Ratman Runt for 1 gold apiece. They are both aligned with the black card suits just like Klaka, plus they're cheap. Then he might hire an Orc Ruffian for 3 gold. That brings him down to 5. Then to give his gang a ranged attack, he might hire a disgraced Elven Archer for another 3. Though he'd best keep the elf away from his other troops during a battle because the elf has red card alignment as opposed to black. That leaves Klaka with 2 gold coins remaining, which he chooses to keep in reserve because he can spend those on various in-game actions such as bribing opposing fighters, recovering useful cards from the discard pile, healing wounds, buffing his own combat hand, and so forth. For today's demo, Klaka is facing the Body Snatcher, who is going to stick with an undead theme so he can make the most of his special ability, Dead Good. 3 zombies cost 1 gold apiece, and 2 skeletons cost 3 gold apiece, so that's a total of 9, leaving the Body Snatcher with 1 gold coin in reserve. The Kobolds and Cobblestones rulebook includes 8 different pre-made scenarios, including Protect the Rat, Runaway Carriage, and Mr. Cuddly, but let's say we're playing an all-out brawl, which is the basic scenario for a casual game. To move things along, I have pre-deployed the gangs on opposite sides of a disputed territory here, and in a game like this, each gang would receive victory points for each opposing gang member it removes from play during the game. Normally deployment goes something like this. Kobolds and Cobblestones is played with 3 decks of standard playing cards, 1 for each player, as well as a single event deck that they share. Prior to deployment, each player draws an event card, with the high card choosing which side to deploy on. Then the players draw again. High card decides whether to deploy first or second. Then the players alternate, placing individual models in their designated deployment zones until all gang members are on the table. Next, each player draws 5 cards from their own combat deck, plus any additional cards based on their gang leader's leadership, which in this case would be 1 additional card for each side. Normally these combat hands would be hidden, but we're going to leave them face up for demo purposes. After everyone is set up, the game goes into turn 1. Each player draws an event card, and the player with the highest card gets to decide whether to go first or second. Orcs are going to go first, and these cards go in the discard pile. Now it's time for the action phase. This is an alternating activation game, with each model activating once per turn. Each activating model gets 1 free walk action, and then 2 other regular actions, which include things like attack, climb, dash, and interact. To measure movement, you just use a regular playing card, with the figure moving either the card length or its width, depending on its movement stat. So a Klaka moves a W, so that is a width, and so he can move like that with his free walk movement. Also, movement is front to back, which is pretty easy, but it also means that all the normal-sized gangsters, not the big guys, but everyone else, should have a consistent base size. Otherwise, the 30mm bases will move further than the 25mm bases. Unfortunately, my mini collection is not based consistently, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. If you want to take a dash action, which lets you move again basically, it always has to be after your free walk action. So for example, this zombie could walk over here, and then dash over here like so. Fortunately, you have a lot of freedom in how you sequence your actions. So the zombie here could choose to walk, then dash, we'll just say that was a dash, and attack. If he was close enough when he started his activation, he could walk, and then attack, and use 2 actions to attack with. Or the zombie could even attack, and then walk, and then dash, if you wanted to make a hasty escape. Although, if you are attempting to break away from combat, you have to draw an event card to see if you can do it successfully. So the zombie would draw a card from the event stack. He got a black card, which is a failure. So he used his action, he did not disengage, If he had drawn a red card, however, that is a success, and he would have been able to disengage and move back as planned. So earlier I referred to the combat deck and the combat hand. These are what you use to attack in lieu of dice rolls. Every figure has a fight stat and a defend stat, though on some characters the defend stat is listed as a dodge stat, which I think is a typo. If you know what's up with that, please leave a comment because I'd like some clarification either way. So let's say this Orc Ruffian with a fight of 3 is attacking this zombie who has a defense of 2. Once he's declared the attack, the Orc player will secretly select up to 3 cards to make a poker hand. That's because his fight is 3. He might choose the best possible hand from what he has to work with, or he might be strategic and choose other cards and keep some cards in reserve. Now he doesn't tell the zombie player how many cards he's going to play or what those cards are. If a fellow gang member is already in base to base with the zombie, then the Orc gets a gang up bonus, which would raise his fight to 4, so he could play an extra card if he wanted to. Not knowing what cards the Orc will play or how many, the zombie could choose to simply fold, or he could play up to 2 cards to try to defend. So we'll have the zombie play 2 5s. And the Orc is just going to go for it, so he's going to decide to play his 3 10s, so that's 3 of a kind. So 3 of a kind beats a pair, so the Orc is 1 combat. According to the handy-dandy chart, a 3 of a kind is actually 2 levels above a pair, which means the target model receives 1 wound off his total of 3. If the Orc had played 2 pair instead of 3 of a kind, then his hand would only be 1 level above the zombie's hand, and the zombie would be stunned. Now let's check for critical hits. The Orc Ruffian is a member of the Black Suit Alliance, and on his stat line he has a potential to activate a crit 1 effect or a crit 3 effect. Now those numbers, crit 1 and crit 3, refer to the number of black cards that the Orc played during his successful combat because he is in the Black Suit Alliance. So in this case, the Orc was successful in combat. He played at least 1 black card, which was enough to activate the crit 1 effect, which is bash, and that means that the zombie takes an additional wound. Had the Orc's hand had 3 black cards, then he would have activated his crit 3 effect instead and would have triggered a nasty sprain on the zombie. So, since bash increased the attack's damage by 1, the poor zombie has suffered 2 wounds, leaving him with just 1 wound remaining. Fortunately for the zombie, he has the regenerate ability, which means at the start of his next activation, he can attempt to heal a wound by drawing a card from the event deck. So the zombie drew a black card, which is not what he wanted. That basically ends his regeneration attempt. Had he drawn a red card, he would have healed a wound, and he would have been able to draw again to try to heal the second wound, but because he drew a black card, it's all for naught. If he survives, he can try again on his next activation. Some gangers, not many, but some, like the Halfling Bowman, the Elf Archer, and the Goblin Sharpshooter, can make ranged attacks. There's no facing in Kobolds and Cobblestones, and no range limit on the missile weapons. However, you do need line of sight on the target. If the shooter can see all of the target space, then it is a clear shot. But if not, it is a tricky shot, and the shooter's maximum number of attack cards is reduced by 1. You can shoot into combat, but you have to draw an event card to see whether the arrow strikes friend or foe, with a red card meaning a positive outcome and a black card indicating a negative one. So in this case, the elf would have shot the goblin runt instead of the skeleton. Which reminds me, we did not talk about antagonism tests. So let's say that the elf is getting ready to activate. He is within 1 card length of this goblin runt. These guys have opposing alignment, and so the elf needs to draw an event card to see if he's willing to activate, because he's giving the runt the stink eye, because even though they're on the same gang, they're not of the same alignment. So the elf drew a black card, which means he is in a snit. He's not going to activate at all because he's got some resentment toward this goblin. So it would have been better for the gang if the elf was back here while he was activating. That way he wouldn't have to make an antagonism test against the goblin runt. Since he's shooting into combat, he still might hit the runt though, which isn't going to help with team building at all. If the gang employs a wizard, that wizard can attempt to cast either an attack spell or a support spell to attempt to assist the gang. But instead of playing poker hands, wizards try to get the best blackjack hand they can, drawing from the event deck. So if it's an attack spell, let's say the wizard is trying to blast that zombie. Zombie, as the defender, draws a couple of cards. Try to get a hand, so he's got 11. He's going to draw again, so he's got a 16. He'll stand pat at 16. The wizard is attacking. He gets a 4, a 12. That could be a 13. And that's a 21. That's really good. If the wizard hadn't drawn a 21, he would have just compared his total score with the defender's total score, looked at the magical chart, and determined how many wounds were inflicted based on those scores. So that normally would be 2 wounds, but because the wizard got a 21, there's 1 additional wound, so that's 3 wounds off the zombie. Plus, the wizard has 3 black cards in his hand, so there's the special effect Terrify, which comes along with all those wounds, but 3 wounds is enough to kill the zombie, so the zombie is blasted to atoms by that spell. Wizards can also attempt to heal their allies with a support spell, and that works pretty much the same way, except the ally draws 2 cards to kind of represent his magic resistance, and then the wizard draws a blackjack hand as normal, trying to get the best possible score. So I got an 18. So that's pretty good because that would heal up to 4 wounds on the elf if he needed it. Now if a wizard busts while he's drawing his blackjack hand, let's say he goes for it here, and so he's got a 18 plus 9 is 27. 26 to 27 would cause 2 wounds on the wizard. So it probably would behoove him to play conservatively with his magic if he wants to stay alive. So just like Mordheim and Frostgrave, Kobolds and Cobblestones also offers a robust campaign mode where you can build the notoriety of your criminal gang, fill your coffers with gold, hire more powerful gang members, and even kit out your fighters with magic items and special equipment. You can even place bets on the outcome of other crime lord battles within your campaign, increasing or decreasing your gang's wealth depending on the fickle winds of fortune. Okay folks, that is a wrap on today's quick look at Kobolds and Cobblestones from Osprey Wargames. There is actually quite a bit more to this game once you start digging into the various special abilities and critical hit results, but hopefully this overview will give you a sense of the game's basic mechanics. No doubt I've misinterpreted a rule or two, so if you see anything obvious, or if you have some insight into this game, please leave a comment. I'd be very interested to hear what you think about it. Thank you as always for checking out today's video. We have some big things planned for the near future, so please stay tuned for that. But until then, try to have some fun out there, take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.